Okay, good. I'm going to be very short. I know you're here to see Jakob, not me, but just a couple of words of introduction. First, it's my pleasure to welcome Jakob to Google. It's not his first time here. He actually was on the Google initial board, advisory board years and years ago, and was one of the original early consultants at Google. So he's actually returning. Jakob is, I think, arguably the world's foremost expert on usability right now. He wrote a book last fall called Mobile Usability, and I think there's some copies in the back that if you are interested, some are free and you can buy them as well if you'd like. Jakob has a PhD from the Technical Institute of Denmark. He's worked at Velcor, Sun, IBM, and now is at his own company with Don Nielsen Norman Group. One interesting thing that I found when I joined Google a few years ago was we were over in 42, and the design group was centralized at that point. And there was a picture of Jakob on the wall, kind of in an angelic pose. And underneath it, it said, WWJD. And under that, in case you didn't understand, what it said was, what would Jakob do? So it's kind of a little bit of an irreverent play on Jakob's influence at Google and the field of usability. So please help me welcome Jakob to the stage.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everybody. So I won't really talk about mobile usability kind of now, because I'm sure all you're working at anyway. I'll talk more about the past and the future, really kind of a combined little set of things there. Some of the themes I want to cover are that we actually have a lot of things we know about usability that is very stable in this otherwise fast-changing field. I want to touch a bit on the question of the specific technology and platforms, whether it matters or not, and kind of both are the answer here. And then I want to end with talking about how we get usability more widely applied. Before I do that, I'm just going to show you a little video clip of we do a lot of user testing, as you do as well. And to show you a video clip of one of the studies. And this is a study, was done actually in London, as it turns out. But we did it in a hotel because we didn't have a lab there. So as you may know, in hotels, when you want to get onto the internet, they first show like their own hotel screen, and then you kind of click through that, and then you get online, right? And for everybody in this room, that's not anything you consider to be a usability problem. But we had this user, and I'm going to show you what happened when he's trying to get onto the. So he's just trying to get online, basically. That's the problem.
Now I know to log into Google.
What's that?
I've got to go down to the internet. Got it. Does it start from here? Start. Get on the internet. I'm at a lost how to get on. You're here.
That's a hotel owns web page.
So, do you know what browser you use at home?
Google.
Okay.
So I normally click here, right, and Google will come up down the side from me, but just what are you on, Firefox or something? I'll go to Firefox. Okay.
Do you usually use Firefox
No.
at home?
But how can I get onto Google?
So all of your work is for nothing because you can't get to Google, right? And the reason I'm showing you this is that it really, I think this showcases in many ways the design challenge we're facing, that we have a lot of users whose mental model of computers and the internet is like, there's no distinction between what's a browser, what's a website, what's an operating system, what's in this and that and the other. For all the people in this room, we have those very clear distinctions, and that helps us then understand all the fancy stuff. But this guy couldn't even get onto the internet, really good. He couldn't get to Google. He didn't distinguish between what's a browser, what's a Google, what's a website, Our moderator who was running the study, was kind of violating a little bit some of the rules for doing user testing because he was helping him here. But the reason for that was that we were not interested here in studying how he gets online. We're interested in studying how he would use various websites. We had like actually get him to those websites, which is why he tried to help him. Well, maybe if you use another browser, it'll be easier. No, that was not the problem actually. So I think we have still a lot of things in usability, and that's just going to, again, sort of a little bit of history, show some of the cases of where I have taken big companies to task, because of course small companies make design mistakes as well, but the big ones are the ones that are worth talking about. Flash 99% bad. I mean, that was just really at that time a great kind of assault on usability. WAP was, the early way of doing mobile devices, and I think WAP is a great example of that. The technology actually does matter, because it's not just that it was mobile way of getting onto the internet. It was such a bad way of getting onto the internet that it essentially didn't work. We did a big study of this in 2000. And usually when we do in my company, when we do a study, we publish like a big report with guidelines on how we recommend you should do design. But in that case, there was only really one guideline, which was don't do it, because web was so bad, right? PDF online. So the one I have here, like the search engines, this is actually not a complaint about Google being bad. It's a complaint about Google being too good. The others are complaint about bad design. This is actually a complaint about good design, because I think Google has been so good that it has kind of almost taken over the internet more than I would like to see. But I can't really ask you to do worse work, so I don't really know how to handle that problem other than ask other people to do better work, I guess. Amazon's Kindle, that's another good example of that the details really matter, because their first attempt at doing a tablet was really terrible. And we did user testing on this, and just with a handful of people. And it's a great example of why you can do it with few people and you will really learn, because we had, just with those few people, it was clear that it was insufferable to get anything done on, I would say, on the 2011 model of the tablet. Now, last year's model was already much better. Another example of that, by the way, was the web study, because we had, I believe we had like about 10 users or so in that study. And after we published the findings, the telecoms industry, the entire telephony industry, which is a huge industry, particularly back then, kind of rejected our findings, said, well, you only tested with so small people, for few people, and they only had their phones for a week. And it's kind of like, well, if after a week you still can't figure out how to get tonight's weather forecast, and we ask people, would you like to use it, and say no, it's kind of like, this is not a small finding, in which case, for sure, if it had been a little issue, that it wouldn't have been a big enough study to determine a small issue, but for a big issue, for sure. The latest example is Windows 8, and what I wrote about Windows 8 is to be called Microsoft Window in the singular, because they abandoned multi-window, and which is their trademark, really. And that's another example where it's reportedly they're now going to kind of scale back and do it either right or at least better the second time around. But for a lot of these cases, a lot of these kind of really big failures were things that could have been found with relatively small studies. I mean, our studies are not big studies. We don't have the budget of, Microsoft Usability Department or Amazon's design group or anything of that nature, right? And we find with very small studies that these are failed products. So I do think that these big companies need to get better, except maybe Google needs to get worse, I don't know. But because I have been doing these things, it's been somewhat controversial over the years, and so I do see things like this from time to time getting out there. This one I kind of like better. This is when I did this talk with Don Norman, and it's like, I feel like the Rebel Alliance, trying to make things better for the people. But one of the big things that people say kind of against all of this work that I'm talking about here is that when we have our usability findings and these guidelines and recommendations, it constrains their creative freedom. So is it true that designers are, sort of suffering under these nasty usability people? And I would say no, and I'll give you a few different arguments for that. And so my first one, I'll take an analogy from the field of music, and I'll do it as a little participatory exercise here. So I'm going to play for you two pieces of music. So there's one piece of music, but performed twice. and it's by two different opera singers. So they're both going to sing the same little piece of an opera. And your job is to identify which of these two opera singers is Luciano Pavarotti, you know, this rather fat, very famous opera singer, Pavarotti. So which of these two people, first or the second, they're saying the same thing. Who's Pavarotti? Exact same thing, second singer. Okay, so who thinks that number one was Pavarotti? We have 5% of the audience. Who thinks number two was Pavarotti? And we have 80% of the audience, and the last 15% have no opinion. Okay, so the majority was right, which means that you guys are all big opera fans. Well done. But it's clear, in this example, it's clear that there's a difference, and the first guy was a great singer too, but there's still a difference between the singers. And this is a very constrained design problem to create this operatic performance, because every single note they're singing was written more than 100 years ago. Every word they're singing was written more than 100 years ago, and yet there's plenty of creativity left in the performance. And design is not nearly that constrained, you know. And what we're doing in usability is we're documenting the facts of the world, which is how things really work. And so as an example, another example, let's see if I have a pen here. I have a pen. So here I have a pen. And since I'm actually giving a lecture now, I don't really need a pen. So therefore, I'm just going to leave my pen here. You see the pen, right? I'm going to leave it there. And maybe later, I think maybe I do need my pen anyway. So I'll go and get my pen. And do you remember where to leave my pen? I left it here, I swear. So this is bad. I'll leave my pen here. This is why I want my pen. Now I'm very annoyed with Sir Isaac Newton. Why did Newton come up with a stupid law of gravity that causes my pen to not be where I want it? Right? Well, that's clearly the wrong reaction. It's not Newton's fault that things fall to the ground. It's not my fault that people have trouble using certain websites. It's because that's the way people are. And so, in my view, usability constrains design in one way, which is that it reveals the facts of the world, which is the fact of the users. And users are very different than you guys. Users are like the first guy we saw in the video. And that's how it is. And they are like that whether or not we show the video clip. They are like that anyway. And you've got to design for the way people actually are. And so that's really what I'm trying to kind of get through is those issues. And we have a lot of things we have learned over the years about usability. There's also things that are not unchangeable facts. I think that so let me show another example to demonstrate that. So what am I doing now? Anybody knows what I'm doing now? You're being very literal here. I'm guarding against evil spirits. If you've ever been to the British Museum, you will have seen this. This is the gesture for guarding against evil spirits. But you don't have to go to the British Museum. You can also go to the Louvre in Paris, and you'll see that as well. There's, in fact, endless of these monuments that show this guarding against evil spirits. When you hold up like this, just guarding against evil spirits. So this was universally accepted, at least in Syria, 3,000 years ago. And today, I think nobody knew, right? So in that sense, that's kind of like, well, can we use this icon? Well, if it's universally known, yes, I can use the pine cone gesture to make you feel I'm guarding you against evil spirits. On the other hand, there's no inherent reason why that should be so. That can easily change over time. And a great example of that in the web world is whether blue indicates clickability. There's no real inherent reason blue should mean click here. For a long time it did, because that was the way all websites worked. And today it's one of the ways. It's probably still, marginally speaking, the best way, but there's not a big thing there, specifically in blue. On the other hand, a lot of other things are pretty long-lasting and universal. So for example, if you have a big head, you're probably an important guy, right? And that's many thousand years ago, and we can still see the same thing today. Or you want to give people an idea of what's ahead, which we sometimes call information sent before people go there. So this is a photo from the Las Vegas airport. It's very useful, very good usability to have things like that. And those are more universal. Or that complexity is inherently more difficult to use. So I have both these two kitchen timers, but the one with the big numbers I can read without glasses, and it's easier to set it. And how often do you really need to keep track of like 3 different roasts at the same time? It's not nearly as useful, right? So I think a lot of these things we have found over the years really do still matter. Another example that a lot of people have been kind of rejecting this concept of banner blindness, but we keep finding it again and again. So to the right are some examples for some eye tracking studies, and I put in these little boxes to indicate where the ads are, and you see no fixations there. To the left, on the other hand, I have an example from one of the first studies we did. I don't know is it annoying enough yet? I had a little running car there. So in that study, we asked people to find out about delivery information on this flowers website, and nobody could find it. This blinking delivery truck was on the screen at all times, and people couldn't find it. And it's because, if it looks like it was not an ad, it was in fact important delivery information, but if it looks like an ad, it'll be tuned out. And this is just a learned behavior that keeps being like that. I'll show you another example because it's like really nice. We did a few years ago a study on the Ask website.
Any comments on this page?
Well, I didn't even really look at it. Well, today's Chinese New Year, so they have a picture of a rat with lotus cherry blossoms, whatever, in its mouth. I guess they're trying to, just update it for the holidays. I mean, Google does that. Like at Christmas time, they put little Christmas things around the word Google. So I guess they're trying to do something in the same vein.
Mm-hmm. Any thoughts about it?
It's fine. I didn't really take time to look at it.
Mm-hmm. Did you notice it before?
No, I didn't.
How can you not notice that big rat right in the middle of the page, right? But that's how it is, and I can spend another 5 hours showing you more video clips of the same phenomenon. But those phenomena really are true. And so what I want to talk about, so therefore that's why a lot of the technology issues don't matter as much as we think. I think there's a lot of tendency in our field to believe that because we move to a new platform, all the rules are different. Because we have, let's say, faster bandwidth, things change. So some things do change. That's very true. But a lot of them don't. And we are too enamored, I believe, with technology as opposed to these kind of really basic human factors phenomena. So I'm going to show you an example of that from one of my own very early work, just to show you how I make bad mistakes as well. So this is a study I did in 1984. And the problem is, if you have more information you can fit in the screen, how do you do? Right? That's how do you deal with that? And so there are 2 ways of dealing with it. So if I'm going to, let's say, want to watch view line K, right? Is that up or down, right? So it could be I move the information up. So that was mental model is up. It could also be that I move my viewport down, and now K is visible. Those are 2 different ways of thinking about the same problem. So at the time in '84, I'd been to some usability conferences and there was some research done at IBM, and at IBM, at the time they had these full screen text-only terminals, whatever they're called, 3270s terminals, and they had done a study showing that if people had the mental model, in this case down, then they would perform a little bit better than if they had the mental model up. So you just change what you call the commands. I mean, the same thing will actually happen, but if you change what you call the commands, people will be a little bit faster if they think of it being a down command to display the line K, and of course they test to display the line A as well and all that. But and I had seen these early computers that had come out at the time, like Macintosh and stuff like that, really early revolutionary graphical user interfaces, and so I went to a university that was too poor to actually buy a Macintosh. They were expensive at the time, so I didn't have one, but I'd seen the demos, and in the demos it was very clear to me that you could see the graphical user interface, you could really see the text move up in a more smooth manner than you could see in those full screen terminals. So to me it very much felt like it was an up command to move the K up to become visible because you could see it move up. So we actually did get hold of a graphical computer at the university, and we implemented this thing and did the study. And I really expected that now I would prove that graphical user interfaces required the opposite mental model of text-based user interfaces, because clearly in text it was down, or text-only screens was down, and in graphical user interfaces it was up. Our study came out the same as the IBM study. Down was a superior mental model. I mean, not by a lot, but by a little. And the reason was because the difference between up and down here was not the difference between text only versus graphical screen. The difference was between you moving something and seeing it being moved. So when I just saw the demo, I didn't have the computer myself, and when I saw the demo, the text was clearly moving. But when I was there, I was clearly moving, or the user was there, they were clearly moving towards K. I mean, their thinking was, I want to move down the document. And that became the superior, the dominant factor in which of these two ways of thinking about the problem are superior. And so I point this out because I'm kind of arguing against us being too enamored of technology, while admitting that in this example I was too enamored of technology, because I thought that the difference in the type of screen we were using, or display we were using, would make a difference. And in fact, it was a difference in the user's task that was making the difference. And of course, today we do have actually an interesting difference, because now we have another way of moving information, which is with a gesture. And when you're moving the gesture, then actually moving to see K actually does feel like an up movement. That's because now I'm actually moving the text. Before I was manipulating the window. So again, it's a difference in the task that makes the difference. And I think that's important for us to keep remembering. Now, after this long argument about how technology doesn't matter, it actually does matter. Because even though I think the big principles are definitely the same, a lot of the smaller details are very different. And the details matter so immensely to usability. It's like people can have sort of a lot of like really big picture ideas that do really right. And if people can't figure out where to click, the entire thing is for nothing, right? And we've seen a lot of examples of this. One of the most recent ones to come out was, I think, Facebook's home thing for Android was reportedly a big failure, because they didn't design really for Android's special features. But that is history repeating itself, because the exact same thing has happened many times over with, for example, people porting software from Windows to the Mac, and just like earlier versions of Microsoft Word and things like that, that were not really native to that environment. Or when Windows was young, people porting things from DOS to Windows, and it wasn't a graphical user interface. So it's really just another example of the same point, which is you have to design for the characteristics of the device. And as the devices, particularly the more primitive or simplistic they are, the more important it becomes to really fit with them. If you have a very broad, general purpose, like powerful, it's maybe a little bit less so important to exactly fit it right. So if you have a really big, huge computer screen and a very powerful computer, you can suffer a little bit more that it's not 100% right. And if you have a small phone, it's more important that it's exactly right. And so there's a lot of discussion today about things like responsive designs and so forth, about how you can make things adapt and fit to the different environments, different screen sizes and so forth. And on the one hand, it's very appealing because you obviously want to design once and run everywhere. But I remember once we had the slogan, code once and run everywhere, and it really was like, code once and run everywhere, but test everywhere as well, because it's still broke in half the cases. And that's the same here. If you're trying to make a design that's like reform flows itself, and you're using it in different circumstances, then you do need some different prioritization of features. Maybe certain things should not be visible initially, and so forth. So I'm going to show you another example of this, of how the details matter. And this goes back to this web study from 2000. So again, so this was considered to be an advanced mobile phone at the time. And you can see here that if we wanted to see the news, first we get a news screen up, then the upper left and upper right is we get a news menu. Then we click select news. Lower left is the menu of news headlines. We select one of these headlines. Let's say rail track says Hatfield line not in good state. So then we get an article, lower right. What has actually happened is that over 4 screens we've gotten 2 lines of actual news, because they keep repeating the same things over and over again. Now, so for example, when we go from lower left to lower right, they repeat that headline that we just clicked on. Now, in traditional design guidelines for things like websites and so forth, for hypertext navigation and all that, the traditional guideline is to actually confirm the user's location, give them some navigational situation, and confirm to them what they just did. They know where they are. Also, things like excite latest news to top line as well is another example of navigational feedback or confirmation. So in that sense, they're following a lot of the guidelines that in 2000 we would have had for doing a website for a desktop computer. But for this small display, those guidelines should actually not be followed. You should follow other guidelines. Instead, that says really maximize amount of content you're giving to people when you have that small a screen. And interestingly enough, it may be that these type of findings we had back from that old study are kind of relevant again now with design for watches, because smaller screens are getting popular again. But my main point anyway is we really have to optimize for the device, the smaller device we get. So I want to talk now about how to broaden this out to more people, more companies, and of course it's nice that big companies like Google has great user research and great designers and everything, but we need more companies to do it. We need all 300 million websites to do well and all of that. So again, I want to reach back to history and give you an example here. So. This is from 1628. So if you go to Stockholm in Sweden today, you will see this ship here at the museum. It's an old warship, and it was built in 1628. So at the time, Sweden was at war with Poland, and the king decided that they had to have like a really big warship to fight the Poles. And so they built this ship that was the biggest ship they had ever built, biggest warship they ever built. And when it had been built, it was still sitting at the harbor, hadn't sailed yet. But the captain said, well, before we launch the ship, we should do a stability test on the ship. So you got all the sailors on deck, and you had them run back and forth. So they run to the one side of the deck, and all of them run to the other side of the deck. And they run back and forth. So as these guys run back and forth, the ship sort of starts leaning more and more, tilts and tilts and tilts. And so at this point of time, during the stability test, the admiral of the Swedish fleet comes on down to the harbor and sees what they're doing, and he says, orders the captain, stop that test. We're going to launch this ship now. So they launch set sail, they launch the ship, they sail out, and while they're in the middle of the harbor, a gust of wind comes and blows over the ship. It keels over, it sinks, and it sank in the middle of Stockholm harbor, which is why they recovered it, hundreds of years later, and it's in a museum now. But it never made it out of the harbor. It was that unstable a ship. And so this story actually proves 2 things. The first, of course, is that Star Trek was right. Captains are smarter than admirals. But the second thing, more to our point, is that test before you launch, or your ship will sink. And so it's just proven hundreds of years. I mean, every time, basically, you got to do it before you launch. I saw another nice T-shirt by some guys in Italy that says, "Test it or they will detest it." It sounds better in Italian, but But that's kind of the basic point. So we want to do these very simple, early simple studies. And here's an example of a study that one of my kind of early studies of some early intranet icons. So we tested them with just 4 users. And the first one was intended to be a bulletin board symbolizing what's new. And what the user says was bulletin board, bulletin board, bulletin board, laundry. Now, when you have 1 of 4 users telling you that your icon is completely mistaken, that's 25%, but it's not really statistically, reliable number there. So what are you going to do about that? And so this is where the expertise comes into play. You interpret this data, and you say, well, it's probably not going to actually impact when we have people use this, that they're going to think it's laundry. So we keep the icon, but in further research, we keep in mind if it's going to cause any issues, and it never did. So that was the correct decision. The next icon, the middle icon, was intended to be in the World Wide Web. This was so new at the time, it needed to actually represent it in the interface. So what did people say? Networking on a world scale, that's close enough. Map, location, global. The dimensions of the planet, really completely off the wall. And networking around the world, also pretty close. Well, so here again, we have just a few people getting it wrong. It's really the same as for the first icon, statistically speaking, but here my decision was there's something wrong with this icon. And the reason is I can refer back to some usability principles, which in this case is a mismatch in dimensionality. The globe is a 3-dimensional object, and the network map is a 2-dimensional map, and that's a mismatch, and that's what causes people to not understand that the two things don't feel connected. So we replaced the 3D globe with a flat map, as you can see the final icon, and that worked well. So this is kind of why if you're going to do these kind of very small end tests, you cannot really rely on a statistic, you have to rely on interpretations. So why is it okay to rely on interpretations? Because we do know things about usability. This doesn't mean that these interpretations are always 100% accurate, but it does mean that they're likely to be correct. And it's much better to make a decision and proceed on your project while keeping in mind, like with this first icon, that just maybe you're wrong, and you may have to revisit your decision, because remember that no decision is also a decision, and if you don't act on the data, then you are much more likely to be wrong than if you let yourself be guided by just a little bit of data. So the probability of making the right decision actually goes up dramatically with even a tiny, tiny amount of data. So what we want to do is to expand the use of these user research and usability methods around the world. And I have a little slightly complex chart here to indicate this. This is, there are 2 ways really of how you can do better in terms of usability. And on the x-axis is better methodology. So doing kind of what I and many other people recommend. And on the y-axis, you can have better management support. You can have a more institutionalized, more part of the official way the company is run. So there's a pragmatic how you do it, and then there's kind of on how it's organizationally instituted and supported. So there are 2 different ways you can worry about. And these bubbles here indicate, we did a survey among people participating in an event that we run called Usability Week. So 244 people positioned their company on these scales. And in fact, there's a fair number of people from Google who go to this event. So probably some of them are you, but of course it's anonymous. So I can't say where Google is in the map according to the Googlers themselves. But you can think about that. That's your little exercise, take-home exercise. But what I want to point out is that, so the size of the bubbles indicate how many people position their company at that spot in the diagram. And what we really want to point out is how the vast majority of companies are in the red zone. So they don't do really quite the recommended methodologies and don't have that much management support for it either. And this is, of course, a biased sample because these are people who come to a usability conference. So if we think about all companies in the world, they would probably be much worse off, But this is why we're still in the early stages of really making design driven by user needs. So there are some companies up in the green area that do most or maybe even everything for a very few up at the number 8 do everything right. But another thing that's interesting about this chart is we don't have so many people out in the other corners, the upper left and lower right corner. We have a pretty high correlation between these 2 dimensions of 2 different things you can do. So the everyday kind of as I'm doing it, methodology work and the management support and how much it's part of the company culture and institutionalized. These two things tend to go quite together. And that's interesting because there are two different sort of strategies for how to get better design. And different people have different opinions about it. So actually in the Nielsen Norman group, I have been the one advocating the methodology approach, let's do it. And my colleague Don Norman has been advocating more the management support role. Let's convince management to do better. And the truth is really that both of us are right in the sense that you need both because these things tend to be quite, as you can see from the data, quite correlated among companies. But if you think about this point that almost everybody, even among the biased sample of companies that do care enough about usability to send people to a usability conference, even there, most companies are in the red zone. So we're still in the early stages of really getting technology to work for people. I mean, even just before we did this talk, I had trouble getting the projector set up, and thanks to the good AV staff here, we've made it work. But it's amazing that still to this day, we have to struggle of just projecting a simple slideshow, and that's because that technology companies still care too much about let's put out some new feature as opposed to make the old feature work. I think we need more attention to just that simple, quality assurance really. Okay, so to conclude here, some of the big challenges for usability. I think we need to have much more focus on productivity growth for knowledge workers. And so much of what we hear today is more about the fun or playful side of computers, which is also very important, admittedly, but we do live in a knowledge economy, and supporting essentially our type of work, but many other types of work as well, collaborative work, all this kind of more information processing work, we don't really have, I think, a good enough grasp on that. That is one of the big reasons that growth in the economy is really slowing down in all the advanced countries. Is we know how to make agriculture more productive for sure. We know how to make industrial manufacturing more productive. Those two sectors of the industry are both doing extremely well and being more and more productive every year. But our share of the economy, which is much the biggest these days, we don't know how to make us much more productive. And it's one of the reasons we don't know is that it's not worked on very much. So a project we did recently was about social networking in the enterprise, social networking in intranets. And we studied a lot of different companies who are doing these type of things. And the common feedback we asked about, so how do you measure the ROI, the return on investment of your investment in adding these features to your internal computer system? People said, well, it's obvious we should have that. Just like email, it's obvious we should have it. Well, obvious is not good enough because it's actually not obvious. We have had so many other examples of things that sounded good but were not good or were done in a suboptimal manner, that I feel that's the same here, that if we really found better ways of measuring which type of computer interfaces really make people, let's say, better at problem solving, more creative, more able to get their work done in a more high value fashion, we would have, it would vastly increase our growth of the economy, our contribution to the economy. So that's, I think, this is one of the really biggest thing. Another one is the health risks of information technology, where I particularly want to point out the problem of driver distraction, which is a huge killer of people. So it's possible that the real answer to driver distraction is the driverless car, so maybe you guys are onto that. But truthfully, even if that works, and it'll be at least 10 years before everybody has one, that's for sure. So let's just look at a 10-year perspective. So over the next 10 years, about 2 million people will be killed by driver distraction worldwide. So one way to think about this is people who work on Android here, you're going to be responsible for about 1 million people being killed over the next 10 years. I mean, not personally responsible, but I mean, because they use it wrong and so forth, right? And so if we can work on driver distraction and really try to not even solve the problem, but just reduce the problem. So if we could reduce driver distraction to the point where we could cut this death in half, that we could save 1 million people from being killed over the next 10 years. It may be not as good as curing cancer, but it's almost. It's a really major thing that we could do. if we could really address this problem some more. There's also the problem about people being, there used to be this issue about couch potatoes, people sitting and watching television and getting sick. And now we're probably just going to have iPad potatoes instead. So same type of problem again. There's also other issues that are maybe not as well known. So the internet has really been pushing a much more shallow approach to information. As we know, this kind of in, out, and just kind of click quickly on things and all that, and which is what information forwarding theory predicts, because the easier it is to move around, the more people will move around. And they will move around information, so they don't tend to embed themselves, immerse themselves deeply. I just wrote a new book. I just can't help myself, but the truth is that a lot of people don't read books anymore. They just look at, like, here's a web page about this stuff, and you don't really learn as much from a web page as you do from let's say, reading a book. So we need to do something to overcome this problem, and also look at what effect does this have for, let's say, the school system or for children's learning. But just for our adult people's, our learning, our ability to understand new things, it's a very shallow information environment on the web, unfortunately. My final point is about old users or seniors. So as we all know, we have a problem with the aging society in terms of things like Social Security, because those pension schemes were introduced when there's a lot of young people available to pay for each old person to be retired. And nowadays, two things happen. First of all, people live longer, which is generally speaking good. And secondly, lower birth rate means there are fewer younger people. So now there's fewer young people to pay for each old person to be retired. So that's one. So Social Security is like going bankrupt soon. We all know that. But that's only one thing. There's also the problem of, going back to the issue of productivity, we know that productivity is declining as people age in terms of some of the more raw measures of things you can do, like how fast you can get various different things done. And so the hope is that in return for that, old people are hopefully more knowledgeable and so forth. That goes to my first point. We don't really know yet how to really do well on that. But in any case, we are an aging society. We are going to have more and more and more old people around. And so we need to really focus also on supporting old people in use of computers. And that's another thing that's being quite ignored. And most companies are much more interested in chasing after teenagers than chasing after grannies. I'm going to show you, this is a study that we just announced actually today. So this is the new news, the data we did. We did a little study where we compared seniors versus middle-aged people, I guess, using a variety of websites. And you can see here the usability metrics here. Basically, seniors have lower success rate. They're slower. They're 43% slower at doing the same things. They make more errors. And not surprisingly, they therefore don't like the web as much, or these websites as much. So we put all that together, right? And we can see that we really have a significant problem if we want to empower this group of users, and empower in so many ways. It could be to stay in the workforce longer to solve some of our problems in the economy, or it could be more on a personal fulfillment-based thing. I mean, people are living longer, so they should stay active longer as well. So in all these different ways, we need to really work harder on making websites and other technology more usable for seniors. I'm going to end with just one video clip of one of the people in our senior study. So trying to invest his retirement money.
They're all the same, all these pages. Retirement, manage your plan, enroll, pay costs.
That's sort of the slower pace, very typical.
Try it again. Well, they pick some beauties here.
So he types on the swap website, mutual fund, no load.
No. I'll send you an email. Okay. Get started. Every time try that. I don't want one of those. Come on.
Poor guy keeps thinking that it doesn't come up.
I think they pick these sites because they suck. They just want people to be aggravated. Like back where I started. I don't want to. Can I go to another company? I don't want to do business with Schwab.
We can stop there.
No, I want to know why I can't find a mutual fund. Plan for retirement. They're the same, prepare for retirement. I don't know how these people make money if you can't even get to planning this damn experience. I said I wanted mutual funds. No, I quit.
Okay.
I quit because I would go to another company. It's too difficult to navigate. I'm sure there are easier ones to get to. Schwab, you're gone. Dudes.
Yeah. So yeah, that's how real people are, right? And then so I show this video clip for two reasons. The one is that I think his last reaction is that's the business rationale for doing usability, right? Because delete if they can't use your site. But the other one is maybe the more human or humane issue that we really do need to support a broader set of people. And if we do that, I mean, we all talk about like this great future of computers and how great technology can be, but it only really will be great if we can support all of these people, and we just have to work on it. So thank you very much.
All right, I think we have about 10 minutes for questions. So we have a mic here, and we also have a dory that you can post a question to. And let's take one from the dory before we get somebody here. You've talked about this first one. How do you think about designing across devices such as mobile, tablet, laptop, glass, driverless cars, consistency versus unique tailored features?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a paradox because, as I said in my talk, it's like on the one hand, technology does not matter, on the other hand, it does, right? So I think you first have to find out what are the core user needs and try to make those consistent across the devices. But then you have to, on the other hand, adapt to the circumstances of the specific platform. Because if you don't do that, if it just kind of grates on people as they're using it on that platform, they will just not want to do it. On the other hand, we're definitely going to we already have more of a transmedia environment where people do move between devices during the day. And if they can't keep their expectations constant, so it's more like the deeper expectations should be kept constant, but the more surface manifestations should be adapted to the device.
All right, next one. And if anybody has a question here, we've got a mic there. But have you run any voice-related studies? If so, what are the primary insights that you've gained?
Well, I have to say, this is so long ago that I'm not sure how much to translate, but I used to work at the phone company, and we did some, things that were only voice, but it really so long ago that I can't really. I think the main problem, with voice, well, the other thing we've done, of course, is a lot of accessibility studies with blind people, and that is voice only as well. And I think the main thing I want to say about that is the problem with voice is that it's one-dimensional, it's kind of has low persistence, so as soon as a word is uttered, it's gone. So memory load is a much harder problem in anything that's an audio interface. And so that, again, goes back to this thing about you've got to design for the device. In this case, design to really try to minimize memory load. But also, like, the word order becomes more important. Like, the thing that people should remember the most should be said last, which is more important in voice than if it's on a screen where they can kind of glance over everything almost equally.
Let's go live.
So there's been a movement, especially with touch devices, away from words and menus and more toward sometimes features that need to be, they're not that obviously discoverable, and you kind of discover them by touching sort of randomly and playing around. Do you have any advice on how to teach people that are not normally familiar with touchscreen devices how to discover these types of features?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I would actually recommend against that, because I think that discoverability is an inherent problem, and I think it's better to make things visually apparent rather than hoping people will discover them, because most people don't tend to explore so much. Little children do that a lot. They really like to poke around everywhere. So we found in studies with kids that they actually prefer this kind of mind-sweeping thing, move my hand around and touch things and see if it not blows up, but if things happen, right? So that's a nice kind of games-like environment. But for grown-up users, they tend to be so focused on the thing that they know that they don't explore other places. You can do things like having little demo mode or reveal modes and some form of animations, but I think those are all almost like Band-Aid type of solutions. So I think anything that's a core feature, I really would encourage to still emphasize discoverability, because the majority of people don't like to spend their time playing with computers. See, we do. This is again about how we're different than the majority of people. So the majority of people don't spend so much time exploring, and therefore they often will never explore these features. And actually, almost worse, sometimes they may discover them by mistake, not knowing what they have done. This is called accidental activation, which is a big problem in touchscreens, that you touch something by mistake, and if you didn't know what you touched, it comes almost like it literally is blowing up under you. So that's another kind of downside of that. So yeah.
Thank you.
Let's have another question live, please.
Hi, I'm wondering, how do you think about change and change aversion? Like when people are iterating on interfaces or rolling out new versions of a service, that's always a big topic internally.
Yeah. Oh, but I think the first thing is to recognize that it is real. And so, if you roll out something, you get a lot of nasty email. It's not because you did a bad job. It's because users just don't like change. So that's the first thing. Just kind of steel yourself. And I wouldn't say ignore that, but don't take it so seriously. There's a lot of criticism just when something new comes out. But that said, it is real, and therefore you shouldn't roll new things out just to be new. And I think there's a lot of problems with the people who work on a design project to feel that it needs a kind of fresh approach, because you sit staring at this screen all day, whereas the users don't, or even if they do, they don't care about it, so they don't absorb as much about it. So that would be my kind of another recommendation, is to kind of be conservative and don't change unless it really is a major step up, because it's a small step up, it's probably not worth it, because you are going to aggravate a lot of people. So those would be my main recommendations there. But for sure, we want to do new things, right? So you want to have new design as well, but only when it's big news.
Sorry, Mike, as a researcher, how do you distinguish when you're getting feedback between something, how can you tell if it is change aversion versus this is actually a step backwards?
True. You probably can't really, other than you have to expect that there's some change aversion. So therefore, if people just say, I don't like it, then it's likely to be that it's just because it's different from what they already know. On the other hand, if they have difficulty using it, well, then you have to, of course, it's a possibility that's just because they're very used to doing things in one way. And then that's when you may have to do like a longitudinal study, and you may have to actually hire people for a week or something like that and just torture them until they get over that. And then if they still don't have the problem, then it really is bad. On the other hand, if after a day or two people are all of a sudden much better, then it's just a temporary problem. But still remember that the temporary problem may become an insurmountable hurdle, because in real life you can't force people to use it for 2 days until they have gotten better. So often people just give up on something. It depends on what it is, whether or not people will stick through it. But that's why you need a lot of these kind of assistance mechanisms that help people. If you move something around an interface, like in the old place, leave a little marker behind for a long time to teach people where it moved, things like that. So you need to kind of help people overcome that as much as you can, because it is real.
I'm concerned I'm kind of reiterating the last question, but I've noticed a bit of a trend, people backporting mobile interface paradigms to the desktop, kind of like what Apple did with scrolling. Do you think that's a good move in the long term for the sake of kind of normalizing those things, especially for like my kids think in terms of touch devices, for example? Like, will that make more sense to them inevitably? Is it worthwhile, or is it just arbitrary?
Well, I mean, first of all, part of it is arbitrary, like the example I showed with the pine cone. That's just completely arbitrary or simple. But if that is simple, people know, then take advantage of that and then use it. And it could be the same here. Like if people have a lot of experience with, let's say, mobile interaction paradigms, then that could be your first gold mine, a first thing that you go to mine or pick from when you're coming up with ideas for a new design. I mean, definitely leverage what people already know. That said, I mean, one of the points I made in my presentation was that there are differences between the devices, and one of the big differences is on a desktop computer, you have a much larger screen, you have a more accurate pointing device, and so forth. So I don't actually think that we really should move to having only touch interaction on the desktop, because I think we can do much more. And also, like these bigger gestures you have to do on a really big screen also are more tiring and so forth as well. So I don't think we should make it the same. But I think we should try. I mean, consistency is always good. That's good for its own sake. This is why design is a little bit more challenging than just saying, "Oh, this is how we do it," because you have kind of contrasting trends there.
All right, so let's go 2 more questions, and I'm going to ask mine first, and then we'll end with yours. This question I think is interesting because it's from the book, and I'm interested in the relationship between client apps on mobile devices and web apps or interaction with web-based products, and how you see that playing out over time.
Right. Well, I mean, over time it's a little bit different. But I think what we know now is that the native apps are definitely superior. Just because of what I was saying, that you optimize for the device, and the more impoverished the device is, the more important it is that you optimize as much as possible, and that's what the native app will do. And that said, I think that over time we will expect that the mobile devices get more powerful, the mobile bandwidth gets speedier, and so forth, and also the web toolkits and whatever get better as well. And so I would actually expect that this distinction will probably narrow and not be as big. And in 5 years from now, it may well be that a well-designed mobile website will be just as good or better than a native app. So it may not be something that one would want to invest in for the true long term, but I think for the short term, I would recommend. Well, if it's something that's a big important thing, I would recommend doing a native app. And if it's a small scale thing that's going to have 5 users, then just do the website. But right now, I would say the app is still better.
And our last question.
Hi. Since the future in the title of your speech, so I wonder, what do you think about the future of the gesture-controlled input, or something like Xbox Connect? How do you think? Do you think that's the future of the user interface?
That's a great question. I actually don't think it's the future. I actually had like futures in plural in my title slide, because I do think that it's going to be more diversified. And I think there's a lot of environments where having your body be the input device, having the world become the computational environment. I think there's a lot to be said for that. At the same time, I don't think that's the only thing, or even necessarily the optimal thing for a lot of the tasks we will want to do. So I think there's a lot to be said still for having as big a screen as possible. I don't know what's the biggest screen. I have never yet seen the truly biggest screen, but maybe certainly the size of an old-fashioned big newspaper is probably the biggest screen we would want to have. But about that size, at least 300 dpi resolution and so forth. So like a millions of pixels type of screen. I think there's a lot of value in that for a lot of tasks people want to do. So I think both types of interfaces will be there. Gestures have several downsides, and they are less precise, and they have less of that persistence, whereas something that's a visual interface, and there's a reason why all these icons and stuff have lived for so long, and it's because they have a lot of usability and inherent benefits by being steady on the screen. You can see them, you can remember them. They tell you what to do, what to click on. Whereas with a gesture, I got to make up the gesture. I got to remember the gesture and so forth. So you probably have a smaller vocabulary there. There are a fewer number of fancy gestures you can. I mean, we know even now from tablets that any advanced gesture you will not see if you run a study with normal users, because they don't do advanced gestures. They only do like tap and slide and very simple things.
All right. Thank you all for joining us today, and please join me in welcoming. Thank you, Jakob Nielsen.